And I think he was proud to have stood beside the president for all that had been done. But I think he ultimately knew that his fidelity to the Constitution was his first and foremost oath. And that's what he articulated publicly, and I think that that's what he felt.
His fidelity to the Constitution is more important than his fidelity to President Trump and his
oath he took. Yep.
Yes.
You'll also hear about a lawyer named John Eastman. Mr. Eastman was deeply involved in President Trump's plans. You'll hear from former Fourth Circuit federal judge Michael Ludig, a highly respected leading conservative judge. John Eastman clerked for Judge Ludig. Judge Ludig provided counsel to the vice president's team in the days before January 6th. The judge will explain how Eastman, quote, was wrong at every turn. And you will see the email exchanges between Eastman and the vice president's counsel as the violent attack on Congress was underway. Mr. Jacob said this to Mr. Eastman: "Thanks to your bullshit, we are under siege." You will also see evidence that John Eastman did not actually believe the legal position he was taking. In fact, a month before the 2020 election, Eastman took exactly the opposite view on the same legal issues. In the course of the Select Committee's work to obtain information from Mr. Eastman, we have had occasion to present evidence to a federal judge. The judge evaluated the facts, and he reached the conclusion that President Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Pence to act illegally by refusing to count electoral votes likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes. And the judge also said this: if Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. Every American should read what this federal judge has written. The same judge, Judge Carter, issued another decision on Tuesday night, just this week, indicating that John Eastman and other Trump lawyers knew that their legal arguments had no real chance of success in court, but they relied on those arguments anyway to try to, quote, overturn a Democratic election. And you will hear that while Congress was under attack on January 6th and the hours following the violence, the Trump legal team in the Willard Hotel War Room continued to work to halt the count of electoral votes. In our 5th hearing, you will see evidence that President Trump corruptly pressured state legislators and election officials to change election results. You will hear additional details about President Trump's call to Georgia officials, urging them to, quote, find 11,780 votes that did not exist, and his efforts to get states to rescind certified electoral slates without factual basis and contrary to law. You will hear new details about the Trump campaign and other Trump associates' efforts to instruct Republican officials in multiple states to create intentionally false electoral slates and transmit those slates to Congress, to the Vice President, and the National Archives, falsely certifying that Trump won states he actually lost. In our final 2 June hearings, you will hear how President Trump summoned a violent mob and directed them illegally to march on the United States Capitol. While the violence was underway, President Trump failed to take immediate action to stop the violence and instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol. As we present these initial findings, keep 2 points in mind. First, our investigation is still ongoing, so what we make public here will not be the complete set of information we will ultimately disclose. And second, the Department of Justice is currently working with cooperating witnesses and has disclosed to date only some of the information it has identified from encrypted communications and other sources. On December 18th, 2020, a group including General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others visited the White House. They stayed late into the evening. We know that the group discussed a number of dramatic steps, including having the military seize voting machines and potentially rerun elections. You will also hear that President Trump met with that group alone for a period of time, before White House lawyers and other staff discovered the group was there and rushed to intervene. A little more than an hour after Ms. Powell, Mr. Giuliani, General Flynn, and the others finally left the White House, President Trump sent the tweet on the screen now, telling people to come to Washington on January 6th. Be there, he instructed them. Will be wild. As you will see, this was a pivotal moment. This tweet initiated a chain of events. The tweet led to the planning for what occurred on January 6th, including by the Proud Boys, who ultimately led the invasion of the Capitol and the violence on that day. The indictment of a group of Proud Boys alleges that they planned, quote, to oppose by force the authority of the government of the United States. And according to the Department of Justice, on January 6, 2021, the defendants directed, mobilized, and led members of the crowd onto the Capitol grounds and into the Capitol, leading to the dismantling of metal barricades, the destruction of property, the breaching of the Capitol building, and the assaults on law enforcement. Although certain former Trump officials have argued that they did not anticipate violence on January 6th, the evidence suggests otherwise. As you will see in our hearings, the White House was receiving specific reports in the days leading up to January 6th, including during President Trump's Ellipse rally, indicating that elements in the crowd were preparing for violence at the Capitol. And on the evening of January 5th, the president's close advisor, Steve Bannon, said this on his podcast.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
As part of our investigation, we will present information about what the White House and other intelligence agencies knew and why the Capitol was not better prepared. But we will not lose sight of the fact that the Capitol Police did not cause the crowd to attack. And we will not blame the violence that day, violence provoked by Donald Trump, on the officers who bravely defended all of us. In our final hearing, you will hear a moment-by-moment account of the hours-long attack from more than half a dozen White House staff, both live in the hearing room and via videotape testimony. There's no doubt that President Trump was well aware of the violence as it developed. White House staff urged President Trump to intervene and call off the mob. Here is a document written while the attack was underway by a member of the White House staff advising what the president needed to say. Quote, anyone who entered the Capitol without proper authority should leave immediately. This is exactly what his supporters on Capitol Hill and nationwide were urging the president to do. He would not. You will hear that leaders on Capitol Hill begged the president for help, including Republican leader McCarthy, who was, quote, scared, and called multiple members of President Trump's family after he could not persuade the president himself. Not only did President Trump refuse to tell the mob to leave the Capitol, he placed no call to any element of the United States government to instruct that the Capitol be defended. He did not call his Secretary of Defense on January 6th. He did not talk to his Attorney General. He did not talk to the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump gave no order to deploy the National Guard that day, and he made no effort to work with the Department of Justice to coordinate and deploy law enforcement assets. But Vice President Pence did each of those things. For example, here is what General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified to this committee.
There were 2 or 3 calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere. But he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Miller. Get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
By contrast, here is General Milley's description of his conversation with President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, on January 6th.
He said, we have to kill the narrative that the vice president is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that, that the president is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or words to that effect. I immediately interpret that as politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly.
And you will hear from witnesses how the day played out inside the White House, how multiple White House staff resigned in disgust, and how President Trump would not ask his supporters to leave the Capitol. It was only after multiple hours of violence that President Trump finally released a video instructing the riotous mob to leave. And as he did so, he said to them, quote, "We love you, and you're very special." You will also hear that in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, members of the president's family, White House staff, and others tried to step in to stabilize the situation, quote, "to land the plane before the presidential transition on January 20th. You will hear about members of the Trump cabinet discussing the possibility of invoking the 25th Amendment and replacing the President of the United States. Multiple members of President Trump's own cabinet resigned immediately after January 6th. One member of the cabinet suggested that the remaining cabinet officers needed to take a more active role in running the White House and the administration. But most emblematic of those days is this exchange of texts between Sean Hannity and former President Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. Sean Hannity wrote, in part, "Key now, no more crazy people, no more stolen election talk. Yes, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real. Many people will quit." Ms. McEnany responded in part, "Love that. That's the playbook." The White House staff knew that President Trump was willing to entertain and use conspiracy theories to achieve his ends. They knew the president needed to be cut off from all of those who had encouraged him. They knew that President Donald Trump was too dangerous to be left alone, at least until he left office on January 20th. These are important facts for Congress and the American people to understand fully. When a president fails to take the steps necessary to preserve our union, or worse, causes a constitutional crisis, we're at a moment of maximum danger for our republic. Some in the White House took responsible steps to try to prevent January 6th. Others egged the president on. Others, who could have acted, refused to do so. In this case, the White House counsel was so concerned about potentially lawless activity that he threatened to resign multiple times. That is exceedingly rare and exceedingly serious. It requires immediate attention, especially when the entire team threatens to resign. However, in the Trump White House, it was not exceedingly rare, and it was not treated seriously. This is a clip of Jared Kushner addressing multiple threats by White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his team of lawyers to resign in the weeks before January 6th. Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
I kind of, like I said, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, "Oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens." So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
Whining. There's a reason why people serving in our government take an oath to the Constitution. As our founding fathers recognized, democracy is fragile. People in positions of public trust are duty-bound to defend it, to step forward when action is required. In our country, we don't swear an oath to an individual or a political party. We take our oath to defend the United States Constitution, and that oath must mean something. Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. Finally, I ask all of our fellow Americans, as you watch our hearings over the coming weeks, please remember what's at stake. Remember the men and women who have fought and died so that we can live under the rule of law, not the rule of men. I ask you to think of the scene in our Capitol Rotunda on the night of January 6th. There, in a sacred space in our constitutional republic, the place where our presidents lie in state, watched over by statues of Washington and Jefferson, Lincoln and Grant, Eisenhower, Ford, and Reagan. Against every wall that night encircling the room, there were SWAT teams, men and women in tactical gear with long guns, deployed inside our Capitol building. There in the rotunda, these brave men and women rested beneath paintings depicting the earliest scenes of our republic, including one painted in 1824 depicting George Washington resigning his commission, voluntarily relinquishing power, handing control of the Continental Army back to Congress. With this noble act, Washington set the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power, what President Reagan called nothing less than a miracle. The sacred obligation to defend this peaceful transfer of power has been honored by every American president, except one. As Americans, we all have a duty to ensure that what happened on January 6th never happens again, to set aside partisan battles, to stand together to perpetuate and preserve our great republic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As we provide answers to American people about January 6th, it's important that we remember exactly what took place. That this was no tourist visit to the Capitol. Most of the footage we are about to play has never been seen. The Select Committee obtained it as a part of our investigation. This isn't easy to watch. I want to warn everyone that this video includes violence and strong language. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation of the violence of January 6th.
Proud of your boy! Proud of your boy! Proud of your boy!
Yeah, just for awareness, be advised, there's probably about 300 Proud Boys. They're marching eastbound in this 400 block of kind of Independence, actually on the mall towards the United States Capitol.
I am not allowed to say what's going to happen today because everyone's just going to have to watch for themselves. But it's going to happen. Something's going to happen.
Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! Whose streets? Our streets! I'll get you hurt you. We are on your side. Don't make us go against you. Understand the side. Pick a side. These are our streets. $20 a picture.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states to recertify. And we become president, and you are the happiest people. Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us. And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Cruiser 50, it does look like we're going to have an ad hoc march stepping off here. There's a crowd surge heading east.
We love Trump! 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 We love Trump!
Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
Priority. We just had most of the speed circle. Breach the line. We need backup.
Madam Speaker, the Vice President, and the United States Senate.
We're going to give riot warnings as soon as the hour is here. We're going to give riot warnings. We're going to try and get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
Cruiser 5 to 50 be advised, Capitol Police 1 advised they're trying to breach and get to the Capitol.
I copy. We're about 5 mics out. We're trying to make our way through all this. We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol to the upper level!
Jack, be advised they're requesting additional resources on the east side as they've broken into that window and they're trying to kick it in.
Without objection, the chair declares the House in recess pursuant to Clause 12B of Rule 1.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. U.S. demands the truth. Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence! Bring out Pence!
We can't hold this. We're gonna get too many fucking people. Look at this fucking vantage point, man. We're fucked.
We need an area for the House members. They're all walking over now through the tunnels. We're trying to hold the upper deck. We're trying to hold the upper deck down. We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need court support. the line. We crossed the line. All MPDs get back. All MPDs get back up to the upper deck. All MPDs get back to the upper deck. ASAP.
And Jack Cruiser 50, be advised that Capitol Police is going to start moving their resources inside. They're going to start the M4 officers first.
Each 208 with 4 members. The doors barricade. There's people flooded the hallways outside. We have no way out.
In fact, officers still remaining on the House floor, on the third floor, to use the subways themselves. It's time to evacuate so we can secure the members on the other side. Copy.
It's up to us people now, the American people. What are you ready to do? One more time. What are you ready to do? And whatever it takes, I'll lay my life down if it takes. Absolutely. That's why we showed up today. Hey, boys, coming in if you don't bring her out. Fuck you, you son of a bitch. You back up. I have myself on back. Don't even try. Get him up. Get him up. Get him up. He loves you. Get him up. Hold up. Get him up. Making stages under that left turn car for backup.
They were peaceful people. These were great people. The crowd was unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love, the love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
Pursuant to the order of the committee of tonight, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Okay. Bueno, estábamos viendo ahí, empieza el programa. Bienvenidos a José Views, a temas de Cuba. Estamos transmitiendo por ambas plataformas. Estamos viendo el Comité del Congreso del 6 de enero. Gracias por lo que están ahí participando. Es algo que debatí hasta último momento si poner o no, pero creo que es importante tener. Yo voy a ser muy sincero en esta ocasión, ¿no? La verdad es que es verdad que hay veces que en la política es sucia y la política uno no quiere ver sus errores y los demócratas no lo ven con las protestas que pasaron durante todo el verano del 2021 y todo este tipo de cosas. Pero esto no es nada de estar orgulloso. Yo, siendo republicano, siendo de este partido, cuando yo llegué a los Estados Unidos, que crecí admirando los valores y principios de la gente que seguía el Partido Republicano, de mi entrenador de mi entrenador de un deporte que practico paralímpico. Bueno, él era una persona, es una persona republicana, y los valores y principios que representan ese tipo de personas es muy diferente a lo que estábamos viendo ahí en esos videos. Voy a ir saludando ahí, están en un receso de 10 minutos. Están en un receso de 10 minutos después de que el video terminó. Este video que hace un reencuentro, de verdad que son imágenes que algunas se habían visto antes, otras son nuevas y las han recapitulado todas en una sola secuencia de film. Y bueno, a ese punto estamos. Ahora empieza el caso. Lo van a hacer a las 8 de la noche por una semana. Se espera este comité que trate de demostrar las pruebas que recogieron o que pudieron colectar durante no sé cuántos meses llevan de investigación. Bueno, son alrededor de 5 o 6 meses de investigación. Este comité tiene muy poca participación republicana, pero la que estaba liderando por los republicanos ahí, una de las pocas que está participando, es Liz Cheney, la hija del vicepresidente, como yo escribía antes ahí, del vicepresidente Cheney. Y de nuevo, creo que hay un cambio en el Partido Republicano, del Partido Republicano de los años 2000 a los años de hoy. Y algunas de las cosas que vi ahí de verdad que son bastante alarmantes. Y yo creo que es bueno enseñarlos para no cometer los mismos errores. Mira, la verdad, yo voy a ser sincero. Aquí, desde que se abrió el canal de José Views, y también por temas de Cuba, se ha luchado por la libertad de Cuba, por la democracia, por la información, por la educación. Y lo mismo tenemos que hacer aquí en nuestro país. Cuando se hace algo que tiene una mala connotación, un lado oscuro en lo que nosotros predicamos, en lo que nosotros decimos todos los días o cuando salimos en las redes, hay que señalarlo, y creo que es bueno poder también uno aprender de cosas, ¿no? Creo que el fanatismo no puede llevarnos tampoco a destruir, a romper la ley. Somos de la ley en orden. Y bueno, ya todo esto se había dicho en anteriores ocasiones, ¿no? Se había dicho cuando esto sucedió. Ahora este comité trata de buscar supuestamente justicia, está tratando de ponerle cargos a algunos. Incluso hay un congresista que está corriendo alguien que está corriendo para el Congreso en Michigan, que ha sido imputado de cargos hoy mismo por la tarde. No tengo el nombre del señor aquí, de este contendiente al Congreso de Michigan, pero bueno, van a haber más cargos durante el juicio. Dicen que van a haber testigos, no han dicho qué testigos van a tener. Lo primero que hemos observado aquí, para ir como haciendo vamos a decir, un recuento de lo que hemos visto hasta ahora, que estaba en inglés, no quería meterme a traducir porque tampoco se trata de interrumpir cada 3 minutos, y creo que era un poco más vago. Era más vago de mi parte, y también era más efectivo que ustedes vieran la imagen y los videos en inglés, y yo ahora dar un recuento y después ver si viran con otro tipo de video, y si no, bueno, hacer mis conclusiones. Y si después quieren, yo les paso el link y pasamos uno a uno a debatir del tema. Pero bueno, voy a ir saludando también a la gente del chat. Veía por aquí a Eliezer, que está comentando desde temprano. Está Raidel. Gracias por Gracias por estar ahí, Raidel, Leti. Gracias por compartir, Patrick Gregory. Un saludo grande, un abrazo para ti, Dayané Díaz. Gracias por estar ahí. A todos, de verdad, muchas gracias por compartir. A ver, ¿a quién más tenemos por aquí? Rodney, un saludo, sé que están manejando. Un abrazo, cuídate ahí con cuidado. Tenemos también quien más participaba por aquí. Bueno, otras personas que entraban más temprano. Estamos también por temas de Cuba. Esto lo hice rápido. Pensaba, la verdad, debatí hacerlo o no hacerlo. Sé que la cadena de Fox decidió no transmitir este comité. Creo que es la única nacional, la única cable nacional que no lo está haciendo. Este receso de 10 minutos no sé para qué es, no sé si es que van a tener un testigo o no, pero ya creo que la parte de los videos ha concluido. Entonces, por ahí nos vamos, ¿no? A ver, ¿qué conclusiones tengo? Primero, ellos sacan videos de Bill Barr, eso lo habíamos visto. Bill Barr ha comentado que desde el lunes, desde el 1 de enero, él había notificado a Trump de que algo así podía suceder. También pusieron videos de Steve Bannon, que es de la parte, Steve Bannon fue el primer jefe de campaña de la nominación a presidente del presidente Trump. Steve Bannon en ese corte, el problema es que también hacen pedacitos, ¿no? Cogen pedacitos de los programas y les ponen sus palabras que dijeron en ese momento. Y ahí Steve Bannon declaraba un día antes que iba a pasar algo, iba a ocurrir algo. También tienen videos de, a ver qué más tengo por aquí, que escribí yo, que lo veí como bastante alarmante. Bueno, sí, que el fiscal general, también el Departamento de Justicia, el vicepresidente Mike Pence había alertado a las autoridades un día antes de que podía haber algo parecido a lo que sucedió, y el presidente tenía la misma información y su gabinete y su chief of staff no hizo lo mismo que el chief of staff del vicepresidente Mike Pence. Lo más alarmante para mí del video, aparte de la violencia y de lo que sucedió, que ya todos sabíamos o supimos, ¿no? Durante los reportes y todo lo que sucedió, es también no sabía, yo de verdad no sabía que supe que se dijo algo de ahorcar a Mike Pence, pero no sabía que la gente que estaba protestando ahí o la gente que se estaba acercando a las inmediatades del Congreso entrando, estaba vocalizando ahorcar a Mike Pence. Yo sabía que lo habían dicho un traidor, que querían que él hiciera algo diferente, que creían que él, vamos a tener algo bien claro, no es una opinión, todo lo que estamos hablando son hechos, ¿no? Y el hecho es que, fair or not, justo o no, la ley es que el presidente era Joe Biden en ese momento. Fraude, aunque haya fraude, la ley y el orden en ese momento no indicaba que Trump tenía los que lo apoyaban, en este caso el 6 de enero, tenían el derecho de cambiar ese resultado. Era un resultado oficial y no tiene ningún tipo de mérito esto que ocurrió, y esto va a quedar en la historia, decía Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney decía, esto va a quedar en la historia y espero todos los que estamos en un partido, en el Partido Republicano, tendremos que cargar con que si tuvimos dignidad en ese momento o no. Así que ese fue el mensaje de Liz Cheney a su equipo, a su grupo de los republicanos. Ella les dijo, bueno, esto sucedió, es un hecho. Trump ni nadie tiene el derecho ni está por encima de la ley. Un día vamos a tener que cargar con la decisión que tomaron muchos líderes republicanos hoy de tener dignidad del momento o no. Eso es hasta ahora todas las notas que he tomado. Sé que también pusieron un par de otros pedazos de video. Pues nada, estoy esperando que entre la segunda parte de este hearing, de esta audiencia del comité que está investigando las acciones del 6 de enero. Está investigando se pusieron videos de los Proud Boys. Sé que incluso han podido, van a poner récords de estos casos de la corte, de declaraciones bajo juramento de personas que han sido ya procesadas por la justicia y que no se ha visto, que no son públicos y van a sacarlo público. Pero como sé que va a haber 6 partes de esta secuencia que van a hacer. La otra es que uno no se puede esconder de esto. Esto es una realidad. El Partido Republicano va a ganar el Congreso, lo más seguro. Ahora en noviembre vamos a tener Congreso, Senado y Corte. Y hay que tener esto va a ser la herramienta que más va a utilizar la izquierda, aparte del el aborto y esto de las armas y este tipo de cosas. Pero eso siempre, esas guerras ideológicas siempre han estado ahí. Los republicanos deben ganar ampliamente el 6 de noviembre. ¿Qué día? En el noviembre. Pero bueno, tenemos esto como NES. A ver si alguien más ha comentado. Voy saludando seguido por aquí. A ver qué más hay por aquí. Patrick Gregory. Ahí nos mete un comentario, pero bueno, eso fue antes. Alejandro, saludos para ti, Alejandro. Qué vuelta, Alejandro. ¿Cómo está la cosa? A ver si puedo leer el mensaje de Patrick Gregory. Dice, no hay un solo día que la Constitución no sea violada. A los violadores se salen con las suyas impugnamente. Ese es el mensaje de Patrick Gregory. Pues sí, a ver, sé que hay personas que sé que la Constitución no es a veces seguida, ni las leyes que se crean del Congreso a veces se aplican, y eso es parte del problema el día que estamos aquí. Incluso creo que si las leyes se hubiesen aplicado desde el principio, tal vez el 6 de enero no hubiese ocurrido, porque si hubiesen utilizado el Departamento de Justicia desde que había alertas de que esto iba a suceder, creo que nada de esto tenía que ocurrir. Creo que se podía haber previsto, pero supuestamente este comité va a encontrar las pruebas para explicar por qué, aunque había información de que algo así podía suceder, no actuaron las autoridades. ¿Quién realmente bloqueó las autoridades? ¿Fue Pelosi o fue algo bastante planeado y algo desde el liderazgo del Ejecutivo, desde el comandante de las Fuerzas Armadas, que era en ese caso el presidente Trump? Queremos enseñar democracia, queremos demostrar transparencia, queremos crecer, queremos educar a la gente. Entonces hay que hacerlo con, yo creo, los hechos, y hay que hacerlo con lo que está pasando, y hay que hacerlo también con admitir cuando hay cosas que no deben suceder en incluso los que apoyamos. Tenemos que exponerlos también y poder ser mejor y poder hacer y la próxima vez hacerlo mejor y no caer en fanatismo ni caer en cuestiones que realmente podía tornarse en una guerra civil. Esto podía haber llegado a un nivel donde el país podía, yo sé que la situación económica en este momento está malísima, la inflación, todo lo que está ocurriendo por la administración Biden, que no muestra liderazgo en el mundo, todo eso es muy cierto, pero el proceso democrático siempre se debe respetar, es lo que hace que todo esto se mantenga y es lo que hace que todo esto siga andando. Todavía no llegan de receso. Voy a dar un chequeo rapidito, pero no llegan de receso todavía. No, todavía están en receso. Así que, no sé, voy a poner el link un momentico por si después alguien quiere entrar, pero cuando empiecen de nuevo, si veo que es más de lo mismo, bueno, entonces terminaremos transmisiones, pero si es más una información más, vamos a decir, revelante, más nueva, algo que no hemos explorado antes, entonces vamos a seguir con esta transmisión en directo, en vivo, desde lo que está ocurriendo ahora mismo con este comité del Congreso, revisando el caso del 6 de enero y van a supuestamente demostrar las pruebas de que todo esto fue planeado por Trump y por la gente afiliada a Trump. Ahí puse el link por si alguien quiere entrar voy a entrar, si alguien entra, voy a entrar uno a uno. Sé que somos poquitos, yo no anuncié esto ni nada, pero bueno, lo quería dejar como para el récord. Anoche hablaba de eso, ¿no? Hay veces que uno hace esto para uno sentirse que hizo, bueno, estaba en las redes, tenía una plataforma y lo puse ahí como para que se plasme. Que en ese momento yo dije, esto hay que enseñarlo, esto, aunque no me guste, hay que también educarnos de esto, hay que educar a otros. Esto es lo que en países de dictadura no se permite, ni de un lado ni del otro, y creo que es válido, aunque no viene de muy buena intención, estoy seguro, algunas de las acusaciones, al final los hechos están ahí, lo que ocurrió es un hecho, no es nada fabricado, es lo que ocurrió. Usted puede ir a una corte, usted puede decir que la fiscalía fue, vamos a decir, corrupta o no tuvo la mejor intención, pero al final, en un juicio, los jueces, las pruebas son las pruebas y la ley es la ley. Y así de simple debe ocurrir con esto. Ya veremos en realidad, si van a tener la evidencia o no, lo determinará lo que pongan aquí. Esto es realmente un juicio público, esto es diseñado para la gente. Sé que está el argumento político de que como los demócratas están perdiendo tanto tiempo, tanto rato y tanto espacio en el pueblo americano, la aprobación del presidente Biden está por 40% y sigue en picada hacia abajo. No tienen ningún tipo de liderazgo dentro del Partido Demócrata, no saben cómo resolver la crisis de la gasolina ni del petróleo, no saben cómo realmente lidiar con la inflación que hay, la vivienda, todas las cosas que están sucediendo hoy en día. Saben que económicamente no tienen una plataforma y el americano vota por su bolsillo. Eso es, mira, si quieres saber, incluso con esta investigación, realmente cuál es la verdad, hay que seguir el dinero. Follow the money. El dinero te dice todo. El dinero te va a llevar a dónde, de dónde sale cada iniciativa, de dónde sale en la política, ¿no? Y con esto de lo mismo va a pasar con esta investigación de qué se hizo con el dinero en el 6 de enero, quién lo estaba utilizando. Hay evidencia que creo que van a poner que los Proud Boys estaban rentando habitaciones días antes y poniendo armas y otro tipo de cosas para poder crear la situación que se creó el 6 de enero. Es decir, fue planeado de ese tipo de cosas y por ahí se puede realmente saber si esto va a llevar a otra cosa, ¿no? Y lo mismo con lo otro que hablaba, con lo del Partido Demócrata. El Partido Demócrata, el bolsillo del americano está muy impactado, no tiene chance, pero esto y van a luchar con esto incluso el teléfono a mí se me ha quemado hoy incluso va a haber una marcha por lo de las armas. Los demócratas van a tratar de ir arriba de la segunda enmienda, van a tratar de quitar armas, van a tratar de restringir y poner control de armas, mientras que y van a usar eso como un objetivo número uno, porque lleva a la sensibilidad y a las emociones de la gente, igual que el tema de la evolución. Mientras que los republicanos tienen el tema económico y los americanos votan generalmente el bolsillo impacta el voto. Así que, bueno, eso es hasta ahora lo que estamos viendo. A Huicho quiero saludarlo también, que está ahí prendido. Huicho, saludos para ti. Eliezer, saludos para ti. Imagínate, dice Eliezer, ahí estaba hablando estaba ahí debatiendo con Raidel. A ver quién más tenemos por aquí. Alejo también aquí comentaba, dice, como quiera que sea este hecho, no puede quedar impune. Estoy muy de acuerdo contigo. Asimismo, mejor dicho, Yo no lo puedo repetir, yo no lo puedo imitar ese comentario. Aquí, bueno, aquí estamos todos, ¿no? 222 a 190 el voto democrático de los demócratas, de los miembros demócratas para... y eso es con lo de las armas, me imagino, ese voto, Raidel. No te leí bien el comentario, pero me imagino que ese voto fue que los demócratas votaron a favor de una legislación para controlar las armas y pasó el Congreso. No creo que pase el Senado, pero bueno, está en eso. Ese va a ser su enfoque. Esa es la evolución, porque no, en realidad no tienen otro argumento. Tal vez utilizarán esto, pero si ven aquí, también les recuerdo que los candidatos para los candidatos que se van a nominar del Partido Republicano para el 2024, incluso puede incluir a Trump, pero la mayoría de ellos se están alejando de esto que ocurrió el 6 de enero, porque saben que va a ser una propaganda que va a utilizar la izquierda. Y nada, todavía no llega la segunda parte. Aquí estamos en espera de la segunda parte del comité del Congreso que está revisando el caso de lo que ocurrió el 6 de enero, que va supuestamente a demostrar la evidencia de lo que sucedió el 6 de enero. Déjame ponerlo. Vamos a
met in a parking garage in Washington, D.C.
There's mutual respect there. I think we're fighting the same fight, and I think that's what's important.
The committee learned that the Oath Keepers went into the Capitol through the east doors in 2 stack formations. The DOJ alleges that one of the stacks went into the Capitol looking for Speaker Pelosi, although they never found her. As the attack was unfolding, Mr. Tarrio took credit.
Espérense, disculpen, que no tengo el audio. Ok. Deme un segundo, que no compartí pantalla. Yo pensé que estaban escuchando ahí y no compartí pantalla. Estoy de madre yo aquí. Voy para allá. Aquí vamos. Me compartir audio. Aquí vamos. Ok, mi gente, aquí viene la segunda parte. Estamos hablando de Enrique Tarrio, de los Proud Boys y cómo fue que corrompió,
At 12:53 p.m.
Within 10 minutes, rioters had already filled the Lower West Plaza. At 2 o'clock, rioters had reached the doors on the west and the east plazas. And by 2:13, rioters had actually broken through the Senate wing door and gotten to the Capitol building. A series of breaches followed. At 2:25 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors to the rotunda. And then right after 2:40 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors near the Ways and Means room. Once the rioters infiltrated the Capitol, they moved through the crypt, the rotunda, the hallways leading to the House chambers, and even inside the Senate chambers.
Individuals associated with 2 violent extremist groups have been charged with seditious conspiracy.
Esta es la parte de Enrique Tarrio, que es el cubano americano que está en la líder de los Proud Boys.
They are a group of armed anti-government extremists. The other group is the Proud Boys. They promote white supremacist beliefs and have engaged in violence with people they view as their political enemies. Members of both groups have already pled guilty to crimes associated with the January 6th attack. Mr. Quested, as part of the documentary you've been filming, you gained access to the Proud Boys and their leader, Enrique Tarrio. Your crew filmed them.
Aquí están hablando de un crew de periodistas que se pudo infiltrar con los Proud Boys y Enrique Tarrio y tuvo acceso
You were with
de los
the
Proud
head
Boys.
of the Proud Boys, Mr. Tarrio, in Washington, D.C. on the evening of January 5th and then on January 6th. On January, you were with the head of the Proud Boys, Mr. Tario, head of the Proud Boys, Mr. Tario,
carrying
in Washington,
some
D.C.
magazines,
What happened?
some extra capacity magazines, and he took
Tario
responsibility
from
for the burning of the Black Lives Matter
arrested
flag that was stolen from the church on December the 12th. We were attempting to.
Deme un segundo, parece que aquí la imagen se distorsionó un poco. Déjame empezar de nuevo aquí.
We drove him to pick up his bags from the property department of the police, which is just south of the mall. We picked up his bags and went to get some other bags from the Phoenix Hotel, where we by the time I'd gone to park the car, my colleague was saying, who'd got into the car with Mr.
Un testigo que tienen
Tario,
aquí,
that they had
que se infiltró en los Proud Boys. Y ahora el sonido me falla aquí.
the Hall of Legends, I believe. And so we quickly drove over there. We drove down into the parking garage and filmed the scene of Mr. Tario and Mr. Rhodes and certain other individuals in that garage. We then continued to follow Mr. Tario. There was some discussion about where he was going to go. He ended up going towards a hotel in Baltimore, and we conducted an interview with him in the hotel room. And then we returned to DC for that night. And what was interesting that night actually was that was the first indication that DC was much more busy than it had been any other time we'd been here, because we couldn't get into the hotels we wanted to, and we ended up at a hotel that, you know, was not as satisfactory as we would have hoped.
Thank you. So what you're saying is you filmed the meeting between Mr. Tario and Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rose, right?
Indeed.
You couldn't hear what was said, but according to the Justice Department indictment of Mr. Tario, a participant referenced the Capitol. Now, on the morning of January 6th, you learned the Proud Boys would gather near the rally scheduled to take place near the White House. What time did you meet up with the Proud Boys, and what was happening when they met?
We met up with the Proud Boys somewhere around 10:30 a.m. and they were starting to walk down the mall easterly direction.
Básicamente, esto es un testigo que han traído en esta segunda parte de la audiencia de alguien que se infiltró en los Proud Boys, alguien que es parte de... se hizo amigo de los Proud Boys, que son liderados por Enrique Terrio, que incluso tiene cargos por eso que ocurrió el 7 de enero.
That's early in the day. That's even before President Trump had started speaking. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
So how many Proud Boys would you estimate were marching together to the Capitol?
A couple of hundred, potentially. Yeah, I'd say a couple of hundred Proud Boys were marching towards the Capitol at that point.
At the time, was the area heavily guarded?
No, that was, I remember we walked down the mall, we walked to the right of the reflecting pool, and then north along the road that leads to the Peace Circle. And as we were walking past the Peace Circle, I framed the Proud Boys to the right of my shot with the Capitol behind, and we see one sole police officer at the barriers, which are subsequently breached. We then walk up and past a tactical unit preparing, and you see that in the film where the man questions their duty and their honor, and you see maybe a dozen Capitol Police putting on their riot gear.
So how would you describe the atmosphere at that time?
The atmosphere was, it seemed to be much darker. I make efforts to create a familiarity between myself and my subjects to, make them feel comfortable. And the atmosphere was much darker this day than had been in these other days.
Así mismo, Gurecha, este juicio está ahora mismo, básicamente lo están haciendo exponiendo la prueba. Esto no es un juicio, esto es un comité que supuestamente ellos van a demostrar todo lo que pasó, entonces están exponiendo y van a traer testigos. Pusieron un video al principio que estaba bastante fuerte. Y
so when the Proud Boys went back down the hill to the Peace Circle, did a larger crowd start together?
Well, no, first of all, we went round to the back and down the steps and we took some photographs on the east side of the Capitol. And then we went for lunch. We went for tacos.
So, Mr. Quested, you're a journalist, so you are careful to stick to things that you have observed. But what you've told us is highly relevant. Let me highlight a few key facts that you and others have provided the committee. First, there was a large group of Proud Boys present at the Capitol. We know that from multiple sources. You now estimate that there were around 250 to 300 individuals that you've testified. They weren't there for President Trump's speech. We know this because they left that area to march toward the Capitol before the speech began. They walked around the Capitol that morning. I'm concerned this allowed them to see what defenses were in place and where weaknesses might be. And they decided to launch their attack at the Peace Circle, which is the front door of the Capitol complex. It's the first security perimeter that those marching from the ellipse would have to come to as they moved toward the Capitol. The Peace Circle walkway was always where the thousands of angry Trump supporters would arrive after President Trump sent them from the ellipse. The Proud Boys timed their attack to the moments before the start of the joint session in the Capitol, which is also where President Trump directed the angry mob, "We fight like hell," end quote. He told them before sending them down Pennsylvania Avenue, right to where the Proud Boys gathered and where you were filming. Now, central question is whether the attack on the Capitol was coordinated and planned. What you witnessed is what a coordinated and planned effort would look like. It was the culmination of a months-long effort spearheaded by President Trump. Mr. Quested, thank you for your eyewitness account of the lead up to the breach of the Peace Circle. This brings us to a point in time where you and Officer Edwards were in close proximity. At this point, I reserve the balance of my time pursuant to 5C, Section 8 of House Resolution 503. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Officer Edwards, I want to start by thanking you for your service and thank you for your courage.
Vamos a preguntar ahora a entrevistar a Liz Cheney, la republicana de este comité. Va a entrevistar al policía, un policía del Capitolio.
In the audience this evening. But it's really important for the country to have a full accounting and understand what happened. I want to start, Officer Edwards, with a short clip that shows the horrible moment when you were injured as the Peace Circle was breached. Officer Edwards, can you describe the crowd that had assembled at the Peace Circle as you and your fellow officers stood behind and guarded the bike racks at the Peace Circle?
Yes, so there were about, I want to say about 5 of us on that line. And there was our bike rack, and then at the bottom of the Pennsylvania Avenue walkway, or right by Peace Circle, there was another bike rack. And so the crowd had kind of gathered there. It was the crowd led by Joseph Biggs, and they were mostly in civilian clothes. There were some who had military fatigues on. We could see people with bulletproof vests on, things like that. They didn't seem, extremely cohesive, but they had gathered there in their outfits, but they had gathered there together. And Joseph Biggs he had a megaphone, and he started talking about, first it was things kind of relating to Congress. And then the tables started turning once the, what is now the Arizona group is what you said, the crowd with orange hats, they came up chanting F-U-C-K, Antifa, and they joined that group. And once they joined that group, Joseph Biggs' rhetoric turned to the Capitol Police. He started asking us questions like, you didn't miss a paycheck during the pandemic, mentioning stuff about our pay scale was mentioned, and started turning the tables on us. And I can conservatively say probably hundreds of civil disturbance events. I know when I'm being turned into a villain, and that's when I turned to my sergeant and I stated the understatement of the century. I said, Sarge, I think we're gonna need a few more people down here. And so after that, I think they started conferring. They went a little silent. They started conferring among each other. I saw the person now identified as Ryan Samsel. He put his arm around Joseph Biggs, and they were talking, and then they started approaching the first barricade. They ripped the first barricade down, and they approached our bike racks. At that time, we started holding on, grabbing the bike racks. There weren't many of us, so I grabbed the middle between 2 different bike racks. And, I wasn't under any pretense that I could hold it for very long, but I just wanted to, make sure that we could get more people down and get our CDU units time to answer the call. So we started grappling over the bike racks. I felt the bike rack come on top of my head, and I was pushed backwards, and my foot caught the stair behind me, and my chin hit the handrail, and then at that point I had blacked out, but the back of my head clipped the concrete stairs behind me.
And you were knocked unconscious, is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am.
But then when you regained consciousness, even with the injuries, you returned to duty, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. At that time, adrenaline kicked in. I ran towards the West Front, and I tried to hold the line at the Senate steps at the Lower West Terrace. More people kept coming at us. It just seemed like, more and more people started, coming onto the West Front. They started overpowering us. And that was right about when MPD's officers showed up. Their bike officers pushed the crowd back and allowed our CDU units as well as theirs to form that line that you see, that very thin line between us and the protesters or the rioters, you know, at that time. I fell behind that line, and for a while I started decontaminating people who had gotten sprayed, and treating people medically who needed it.
And then you were injured again there on the West Terrace. Is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am. So after a while, I got back on the line. It was on the house side of the Lower West Terrace. And I was holding that line for a while. There weren't many of us over there. And Officer Sicknick was behind me for most of the time, for about 30 to 45 minutes that I was down there. We were just, as the best we could, we were just, you know, grappling over bike racks and trying to hold them as quick as possible. All of a sudden, I see movement to the left of me, and I turned, and it was Officer Sicknick with his head in his hands, and he was ghostly pale, which I figured at that point that he had been sprayed, and I was concerned. My you know, cop alarm bells went off, because if you get sprayed with pepper spray, you're going to turn red. He turned just about as pale as this sheet of paper. And so I looked back to see what had hit him, what had happened, and that's when I got sprayed in the eyes as well. I was taken to be decontaminated by another officer, but we didn't get the chance because we were then tear gassed.
And we are going to play just a brief clip of that moment that you've just described, Officer Edwards. Officer Edwards, I just want to thank you for being here. And I know, again, how difficult it is. I know the family of Officer Sicknick as well, who's here tonight. And one of the things one of the Capitol Police officers said to me recently was to ask me whether or not, as members of Congress, all of us understood that on that day, on January 6th, when we were evacuated from the chamber, were led to a safe, undisclosed location, whether we knew that so many of you had rushed out of the building and into the fight. And I can assure you that we do know that, and that we understand how important your service is. Thank you for your continued work with our committee and the interviews, and thank you very much for both of you for being here this evening. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Edwards, can you give us one memory of that awful day that stands out most vividly in your mind?
I can. That time when I talked about falling behind MPD's line, I remember because I had been kind of shielded away because I was holding those stairs. So I wasn't able to really see what was going on over here. When I fell behind that line And I can just remember my breath catching in my throat because what I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I had seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, you know, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, you know, they had, I mean, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood. You know, I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe what I saw. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle. You know, I'm trained to detain, you know, a couple of subjects and handle a crowd, but I'm not combat trained. And that day, it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat, hours of dealing with things that were way beyond any law enforcement officer has ever trained for. And I just remember that moment of stepping behind the line and just seeing the absolute war zone that the West Front had become.
Let me thank you for your service and obviously your bravery that you have told the world about tonight. It's unfortunate that you had to defend the Capitol from fellow Americans. None of us would ever think that that would have to happen, but it did. So let me thank our witnesses for joining us tonight and sharing their experiences with America. Throughout my chairmanship of this committee, I've continuously vowed that this committee will ensure a comprehensive account of the heroic acts on January 6th, and that we will follow the facts wherever they lead. Your testimony is an essential part of that record and helps us do our job. Mr. Quested, thank you for sharing your footage and your account of the day's events with us. The images you recorded and have shared with the committee do a better job than any of our words in reinforcing the violence of January 6th. We hope that the power of your footage help encourage all Americans to consider how citizens with so much in common could viciously brawl at the seat of their democratic government. Officer Edwards, thank you for your brave service, as I indicated, on January 6th, and all you did to protect us, and most importantly, our democracy. If you and your fellow officers hadn't held the line against those violent insurrectionists, we can only imagine the disaster that would have ensued. Your heroism in the face of danger is admirable, and your will to continue to protect and serve despite your serious injuries should be an inspiration to all of us. We wish you a continued recovery and look forward to seeing you back in uniform sometime soon. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for tonight's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The witnesses have just told us what they heard the rioters saying while they stormed the Capitol on that day. Now we're going to hear it from the rioters themselves. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation.
What really made me want to come was the fact that, you know, I had supported Trump all that time. I did believe, you know, that the election was being stolen. And Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Did you recall President Trump mentioning going to the Capitol during his speech?
Oh, yeah. So that's one of my disappointments. He said he was going to go with us, that he was going to be there.
I know why I was there, and that's because he called me there and he laid out what is happening in our government. He laid it out.
But I remember Donald Trump telling people to be there, right? I mean, to support. So you mentioned that the president asked you. Do you remember a specific message?
Basically, yeah, he asked for us to come to D.C., that big things are going to happen.
What got me interested, he said, I have something very important to say on January 6th or something like that. Is what got me interested to be there.
You know, Trump has only asked me for two things. He asked me for my vote, and he asked me to come on January 6th.
When the committee reconvenes next week, we're going to examine the lies that convinced those men and others to storm the Capitol, to try to stop the transfer of power. We're going to take a close look at the first part of Trump's attack on the rule of law, when he hit the fuse that ultimately resulted in the violence of January 6th. Without objection, and with that, the committee stands adjourned.
Ok, aquí terminó esta saga número 1. Ya esta parte sí fue más de lo mismo. La primera parte de esto sí fue diferente, pero esta segunda parte, porque enseñaron videos nunca antes vistos y este tipo de cosas. Pero ya esta parte no... esta parte ya sí no tiene nada de nuevo, ya se lo sabíamos. Hacía tiempo que esta evidencia de última que presentaron de los tweets y de lo que hablaban los manifestantes ya se había expuesto en otras cosas. Bueno, saludo a Guantanamera, que también pasó por ahí. Voy a poner el link un momentico, pero ya esto se acabó, por lo menos la parte del comité del Congreso ha acabado no tengo a nadie bloqueado. Dicen que tengo a alguien bloqueado. Yo creo que no, yo no bloqueo a casi nadie. Para yo bloquear a alguien, vaya, tiene que ser casi un terrorista. Así que creo que no hay nadie bloqueado, tengo que chequear. Pero me entraba un mensaje ahí que había alguien bloqueado. Mis conclusiones finales, el primer video es alarmante que un grupo, una masa de gente llamara al vicepresidente que lo buscaran, ¿no? Eso me llamó mucho la atención. Los videos sí son nuevos, pero los testigos, una policía y un señor que pudo infiltrarse y grabar desde el grupo de los Proud Boys. Ya le decían que va a haber mucha evidencia de los Proud Boys porque había planes. Los Proud Boys planearon la logística durante el 6 de enero. Así que eso es lo que ahora, hasta ahora se ha expuesto. Va a haber 6 capítulos de esto a las 8 de la noche, el próximo, la semana que viene. Creo que están como midiendo la temperatura del público. Esto es un juicio público. Esto en realidad no lo han llevado a un tribunal ni nada de eso. Van a traer evidencia de los tribunales, como les decía antes. Van a traer algunas de los testimonios bajo juramento de algunos de los implicados y lo van a admitir como pruebas en este juicio público que hace el Comité del Congreso, liderado por un demócrata que fue el que habló ahí, y por Liz Cheney, del Partido Republicano, hija del vicepresidente de la administración Bush, Cheney. Así que nada, sé que estuvo calentico ahí el chat. Qué bueno que todo se resolvió, creo que tengo entendido. Y nada, aquí estamos. Ya saben, pronto voy a hacer una directa. A ver quién más tenemos a Cureche. Quiero saludarlo, que no lo saludé en persona, lo saludé en el chat, pero no por aquí. Y nada, también pienso hacer una directa ahora este fin de semana. Está el tema abierto. Estoy buscando ideas de algo nuevo, algo diferente que hacer. Así que vamos a ver qué invento y qué puedo presentar para nosotros seguir educando, debatiendo y creando una sociedad que queremos que imiten cuando hay una Cuba libre y cuando estemos aclamando por la libertad de otros. Creo que hay en las redes sociales están muy picadas últimamente, creo que están es lo mismo y lo mismo y lo mismo. Así que creo que hace falta algo diferente y no, vamos a ver si inventamos algo por ahí. Pues nada, ahí ponía el link por si alguien quería entrar, ya es tarde en la noche. Como nadie está entrando y creo que ya presenté lo que sucedió el 6 de enero en este comité del Congreso. Pues nada, mi gente, buenas noches, se les quiere. Aquí estamos presentes y estaremos de nuevo con si hay algo nuevo en la nueva parte de esta saga del Comité del Congreso que revisa y analiza la evidencia para tratar de probar que hubo algo, que hay pruebas contundentes de que Trump estuvo detrás de el asalto al Congreso. Chao, chao, nos vemos.